So just to introduce myself, my name's Charlie Law. I've worked in the construction sector for over 30 years now, 12 of which were spent heading up environmental management at BREEAM Construct UK, where I spent a lot of time looking at waste reduction and responsible material sourcing. I now advise quite a few businesses. I'm a sustainability director for TDUK, so done a lot of work there on responsible sourcing, but also things on circular economy and carbon at the moment. So keep an eye out for the work we're doing now. So all good. So that's my background. Like I said, this CPD has been developed in conjunction with PEFC, who are one of the world's largest forest and timber certification programs. But we're going to be looking at all the different certification programs today, including FSC and Grown in Britain as well. Just if you want to ask any questions or make any comments, and I've seen this one about chopping. I'm not sure if anyone else is having sound problems, but hopefully it's just the one person there. But if you want to click on the chat, various places, and depending on what sort of device you're using, but if you can find the chat button, please enter any questions that you might have as we go through, and we'll answer those when we get to the end. I'll keep an eye on them, so if I can actually answer them as we go through, I will do, but if you don't pick them up, I'll pick them up at the end. So yeah, if you've got any messages, that's great. I say you're all on mute anyway, which is no problem, so we'll carry on. So just to give you the outline of what we're going to cover today, why do we need forest certification? Touch on that. Little UK timber market and the sources, so you know where your timber's coming from and you can see where the big risk areas are. We'll look at CPET and the approved certification schemes under that, the differences between all those schemes, some of the drivers for certification, and look at inclusive specification clauses. And then we'll actually spend a bit of time looking at chain of custody. So for those of you that are not familiar with it, we'll go through the process of how you check your chain of custody and making sure it's actually come with what you specified. And if at the end, if we get time, we might touch on project certification, but we might be one a bit behind on that one. Okay, so obviously anticipated outcomes. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll know everything about all of those topics. So why do we need forest certification? Oh, simple really. It's about 1 in 5 people worldwide, which is about an estimated 2 billion people, rely on forests for their livelihoods. Things whether that's food, medicines, heat, for or energy for cooking. Or wood products for building, as we do in the Western world. But so we need to make sure that we manage that resource sustainably, and if we don't, it can cause big impacts to those people that live in those areas, whether loss of livelihoods or even loss of lives. This is a picture from Uganda today, from a couple of years back, where they'd cleared the hillside of trees for I think this was for a coffee plantation, and obviously the root system for the coffee plants didn't tie the land together as well as the trees, and they, after a bit of rain, they had a big landslide and it actually covered a village at the bottom of the valley, killing a number of people. So we do need to make sure that when we are looking at forestry activities, we do manage those in a responsible way and in a safe way. The other issue that we have is unsustainable harvesting, not necessarily for timber production. A lot of the forest clearance is actually clearing forest area for cattle and for other farming. That's what the biggest issue is at the moment, is clearing forest for agriculture. And places like Brazil are probably losing around 3.5 football pitches every minute. That's sort of 1.35 million hectares in 2018 alone. That loss is slowing, but from the peak in the 1990s, when we was losing around 7.8 million hectares a year, it's now down to around 4.7 million, which is the latest figures from the UN, and that's still far too much. So we need to make sure that we are getting our timber from responsible sources, from a sustainable source. This is a slightly later picture, because I haven't seen a later one from the UN as yet, but this showed back in 2015 where the key risk areas were, and you can see there obviously Brazil, the Amazon, losing over 500,000 hectares a year, but also places like Indonesia and Africa. But that has changed. Indonesia is turning around now, and hopefully when this map is re-released, we'll see a decline in that loss in some of those areas, very much so. You can obviously see that sort of most of the northern hemisphere, and especially China, there is actually gaining a lot of forest. They're planting a hell of a lot of forest at the moment in places like China. I think Pakistan and India, you'll see that get very dark going forward as well, because they're planting a lot of trees in those areas. So sustainable forest management, we need to remember that most of the timber we use is actually a crop. You know, the picture on the left there is a typical picture from a UK spruce plantation. These were probably planted in the 80s or 90s, so they were a monoculture back then. That's not allowed now. You have to have a bit more mixed forest there. But generally, like I say, these trees are planted as a crop. We should think of them as a crop. You know, these aren't old natural forests. These were planted for timber 30, 40 years ago, depending on what timber you're using. Even when we look at hardwood, so it's on the softwood side there, so on the left there, that will be sort of thinned and cleared over a rotation. This is a 30-year thinning. That timber will go into things like fencing and panels. And at the end of the day, that will be clear cut. So all of those trees will be cut down at maturity at probably around 40 years old, and replanted for the next generation of trees. That's what happens with most softwoods. With hardwoods, it's slightly different. Generally, they are cut on what we call a selective felling regime. So people will go into the forest and only take out the amount of timber that forest can actually naturally regenerate over that time. So you're only allowed to take out so many trees in a particular season, based on the regeneration. So that's how the forests are managed in slightly different ways. Just to give you a bit more of a picture on how much forest comes out over a period. This is the Global Forest Watch, which sort of shows how much forest was taken out on the left in Scandinavia in the red, and what was regrown in that same period. And you can see there's a good correlation between what's been taken out and what's been regrown in Sweden and Finland, which is where most of our softwood timber comes from. Similarly, in the UK, a lot less forestry in the UK. We've only got about 13% forest cover in the UK, compared with something like 37% average in Europe, and somewhere like Finland, which is actually over 70%, Finland and Sweden. But you can see there that, again, there's a good correlation between what's been taken out in the borders and the highlands, and what's gone back in. And you compare that, like we said, with Brazil, where you can see a lot more has been taken out than has gone back in. So the UK timber market, what does it look like? These are the latest figures. The next figures should be out any day now, actually, for 2020. But these are the 2019 figures that were produced by the Forestry Commission in their statistics report. And you can see there that the vast majority of the timber that we use is softwood and softwood derived products. So things like particleboard, OSB, and your fiberboards and MDF, so they're all manufactured from softwood timber. So you've got the sawn softwood on the right there, around over 9.5 million cubic meters there, and then the byproduct from that sawing process is generally what's used, or from the growing process is what's used in the other products. And then you've got a amount of hardwood there and plywoods, and most of those plywoods will be hardwood plies, but most of them are important. We'll go into a bit more detail on that in a minute. So almost 17 million cubic meters of timber consumed in the UK in 2019. As far as the sources of those, you can see that the vast majority of that comes from the UK and Europe. So the UK there, just under, probably, what's that? About a third of the timber, just over that, 2/5 coming from the UK, just over half coming from the EU, with the remainder coming from other countries like China, Russia, and Brazil. Just on some of those, we just need to keep an eye on the legality. We have got legislation in the UK. It's now called the UK timber UKTR, UK timber regulations, which means you must check whether timber is legally felled and coming into the country. And you can see there that there are some issues with a lot of those countries that we may be importing timber from. So like Brazil, South America, China, Russia, and places like that. So we do need to be wary and checking that the timber has been legally felled from those areas. Just a bit more detail on what we're bringing in. So softwood, you can see about a third of the softwood we use for construction is homegrown. The vast majority of the remainder is coming from the EU, a bit from Canada, and a growing percentage from Russia now. So that's where we might want to look at those risk areas for softwood. Hardwoods, again, 2/3, very little grown in the UK, and we do need to look at that. We do need to think about specifications there and looking at what we specify. We specify a lot of oak, and we haven't got enough supply in the UK to meet that demand. So we do need to be looking at specifying other timbers other than oak. So that's one thing to think about. But the vast majority of the remainder, again, 2/3 coming from Europe, and USA, Norway, Canada. And that's mostly temperate species, so things like oak mainly, but also beech, ash, those types of timbers. And then you've got our tropical timbers, coming from places like Cameroon, Malaysia, and other non-EU countries. So that would be your tropical stuff like your Ippies and your Sapilis, those types of timbers. Particle boards, quite a bit of that made in the UK, and the vast majority of the remainder coming from the EU, so very low risk in particle board and OSB. Similarly with MDF, although there is a growing percentage of MDF coming in from Russia and China that we need to keep an eye on. But again, the vast majority, if you stick to the major brands, you won't have an issue there with legality and sustainability of your timber. Plywood is probably where we've got our most risk. We don't manufacture any in the UK, and only around 20% of that comes from the EU, and that's generally things like our spruce ply. So a Wissa spruce, for example, would be coming from Finland. The vast majority is coming from our high-risk countries that we mentioned earlier on, so China, Brazil, Russia, Malaysia, Indonesia. So we do need to make sure that if you're not going to look at any other timber that you use on site, make sure that you do look at your plywood as far as your legality and responsible sourcing. Okay, so CPET, it's a bit of an introduction into that. So CPET, the UK government central point of expertise on timber, this has been around since about 2004. We have it basically splits your timber into two evidence areas. So you've got our independent forest certification schemes, and the two there are PEFC, Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, and Forest Stewardship Council, FSC. And then you've got category B evidence, which is all other forms of evidence, which basically means that if you're getting timber from a UK forestry standard source, and that's where Grown in Britain certification comes in at the moment, that may get moved up to category A at some point. When this was last revised back in 2015, Grown in Britain had only just been launched, so it didn't get into the category A evidence at that time, but that's now quite a well-established scheme. And things like Fleg T, which we'll go into a bit more detail in a minute, so licensed timber. If you haven't got any of those, then it starts getting very difficult, because you're now then looking at what we call this compliance framework for evaluating category B evidence, which is, not too bad if you're looking at a single piece of type of timber, single species. But if you're looking at that plywood where you've got, a number of different species might be in that plywood, coming from lots of different areas, then that's going to be almost impossible to try and complete that evaluation form. So you're very much best looking at some of these certification schemes. Just to give you an idea on the on what they include, so you've got PEFC, FSC, Grown in Britain. All of them ensure forest legality. All of them ensure some sort of forest sustainability. There were some questions around Fleg T in the early days, but that's been I think that's very much overcome now. They've all got fairly robust accreditation processes. The issue is that not all of them come with what we call a full chain of custody, and we'll explain what that means in a bit more detail later on. But basically, that's tracing that timber from the forest source all the way to your site of use, your construction site in the middle of London. You'll be able to trace that through with PEFC, FSC, and Grown in Britain. You can't do that at the moment with Fleg T. At the moment, Fleg T, that license is just for importing into the UK. So once it sort of gets to that UK port, where it goes from there on, it's not tracked and it's not recorded, and that's, at the moment, that's a bit of an issue. So that's something that needs to be sorted out. And we are looking at that at TDUK, whether there's something we can do there. So just, let's pick on the three main schemes at the moment that you're likely to see on your construction site. So PEFC, FSC, Grown in Britain. They do work slightly differently. PEFC is more of what we call an umbrella scheme. So it basically takes independent forest certification standards from different countries around the world. So it started started off in Europe, so you got PEFC France, Germany, Austria, Finland, Sweden started it all off. But now, since then, it's been added. So you got CSA, which is a Canadian Standards Association, Responsible Wood from Australia, MTCC is Malaysia, SFI is North America, and UKWAS, UK Woodland Assurance Standard, is the UK. And what happens? They basically submit their their standard to PEFC, two-way conversation about how it might work, and if approved, they are accepted into that PEFC family. So any timber coming through those standards would be received on site as PEFC certified timber. So that makes it quite easy. All you need to look out for is that PEFC logo, and you know it's from that responsible source. FSC is slightly different. They have their global standard, and that's interpreted into a national standard in wherever they're going to be working in the world. The advantage of FSC is you don't need that country standard to be in place. You can just develop that FSC national standard with a few partners and implement that at the plantations within that country. So you don't need anything national in place. Just out of interest, the national standard for the UK is also aqua. So anything coming in out of a UK woodland can actually carry dual certification of PEFC and FSC. So just bear that in mind, that even though the label might say FSC on it, it's likely to be from the UK. It will come from an aqua certified forest, so it could have been certified to either. Grown in Britain works slightly differently. It's a little bit more of a swapped around. You've got the UK forestry standard that was developed back in the 90s. And that is based on the same principles as like FSC and PFC standards back in Rio, back in 1990. So they've developed the UK forestry standards to make sure UK forests are managed in the right way. And what Grown in Britain does, if you're managing your forest in accordance with that standard, i.e. you've got your management plans, you've got your felling licenses, you can then push that timber through the supply chain as Grown in Britain certified. So it's basically piggybacking on the back of the UK standard. And again, aquas is also accepted by Grown in Britain. So you could have Grown in Britain, FSC, PFC, tri-certified timber in effect. Just to give you an idea of where the dominant of the schemes are, what's the scheme coverage. You can see there that the schemes generally cover, most of America, North and South, most of Europe and Russia, and quite a bit of the Far East. Obviously, quite a few gaps in Africa, but the main countries that we deal with, like Cameroon, we mentioned, Congo, all covered by generally FSC. And you can see there from that map that FSC is very much dominates in the higher risk nations. So, like we said, South America, the Far East, parts of Africa, whereas PEFC is much more dominant in our sort of the lower risk nations and most of Europe and North America, Canada. And that's not to say that Canada hasn't got any FSC woodlands. I think Canada's got more FSC woodland certified than anywhere else in the world, or everywhere else put together. So it's you still might have some of those areas. So certification drivers. So the key drivers that we're looking at, that we've got, I think the main one in the UK has been the government timber procurement policy, developed off the back of that CPET work. Basically says that only timber and wood derived products originating from independently verifiable legal and sustainable sources will be demanded for use in the government estate, and that does include flag T. They need appropriate documentation, and it applies to all virgin timber and wood derived products used on the government estate, including temporary site works and materials supplied by suppliers. So basically that covers everything that's used on site. So, whether it's permanent works or temporary works like shuttering and hoardings. And obviously that's been picked up by many of the building standards that are out there. So BREEAM is obviously developed in the UK. That requires, certified timber, as does SCAR rating, which is the fit out scheme. LEED is an American scheme, but that does allow FSC and PEFC sourcing as well. And there's quite a few LEED schemes, particularly in some of the big cities where you might get multinationals working. They might recognise LEED more than others. So, they very much are picking these responsible standards up. Obviously, you've got your UK timber regulation. So the timber and timber products placed in the market regulations 2013, which is based on the old, what was the EU timber regulations. Basically defines two types of organisation. You've got operators, which are importers, and that now captures a lot more people now that you've got UKTR. At one time, you had a lot of operators that maybe just imported from Europe and weren't covered by EUTR, but now they are still important from Europe, but they're importing into the UK under Brexit. They've got a lot more paperwork to do. And then you've got traders, which include contractors, and they've got responsibility under these regulations as well to make sure they record where they get their timber from. So, so if anything does happen, they get a visit to site from the government authorities, then they can tell them where that timber's come from and show that traceability. And that's where chain of custody helps, because if you're recording it, you've got all that information to hand. And you've got your things like your UN Sustainable Development Goals. Many big organisations are really trying to see how they can work to these sustainable development goals. And you've got obviously our main one, which is life on land there, which would include timber. But especially the big certification schemes, FSC and PEFC, do a lot more than just that sustainable forest management. They are making sure you've got things like good health and well-being in the forests and good paid. So number 8, decent work and economic growth. Like we said, good health and well-being under 3, trying to make sure you've got good education and clean water and sanitation. So they're doing a lot more than just that life on land. And obviously, 13, climate change is a big issue for everyone at the moment. You may have seen the Wood Cost Less campaigns, things like the Path to Net Zero. Timber very much works, is a good result for that. But probably one of the biggest drivers has been reputational damage. And, going back to the early 2000s, the Home Office, and this is what prompted the development of CPET. So the top left there was the Home Office, were found out because they were using timber from suspected illegal sources. They were picked up again on the DEFRA headquarters in 2005 and Landwell Arch in 2006. And the bottom right there is probably sort of the odd one out there. That's the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery from 2003. And that was actually one of my jobs when I was working for a contractor. They thought we was getting timber from an illegal source. We weren't. We've actually gave them all the information. It was from an MTCC source in the end from Malaysia. But the issue was that we hadn't actually asked for it, and it was just through more luck that we had got it from that source. And that leads us nicely into what we should be asking for. So specifying timber. What should we be getting? What should we be asking for when we specify timber? So for me, there are 5 key areas. Should be reference to timber and other wood-based products, so similar to the government scheme. Definition of the scopes, and make sure we include that temporary and permanent works. If you can, so if it's a UK scheme, I would make reference to the UK government central point of expertise on timber and their definition of legal and sustainable. It saves you having to define it yourself. It's a good definition, so use it. Make sure there's that requirement for chain of custody at the site of use. That's a biggie. And we'll talk about how that works in a second. And then if you're allowed to, use examples of schemes that may meet that criteria. So an example, this is the one I developed back in early 2000s for the company I was working for at the time, and it didn't change much over the years. So we basically got our reference to timber and wood-based products, and we make sure it references that temporary and permanent works. Legal and sustainable sources as defined by the UK government central point of expertise, and we make sure it's delivered to site with full chain of custody and with it and include the 3 main schemes there: PEFC, FSC, and Grown in Britain. Obviously, we can't include Fleg T in there at the moment because that hasn't got that chain of custody. So that's why that's not in there. Other examples, so that's an example of company specification. I know people like BAM and Wilmot Dixon and others use that type of scheme, but you've also got the MBS specifications for those architects and engineers out there that use MBS. We did a lot of work with these a couple of years ago to make sure that their timber specifications were in compliance with that CPET requirement. So we've done a lot of work to make sure that they included all the certification schemes, so FSC, GIB, PEFC are included in there. And you get a few choices of the wording you want to use, but in essence, they're basically saying that you've got to use certified timber now in those MBS specifications, which is really helpful. And then, just a couple of examples. There's one from BAM just to show what they use, and they actually, support the UK market. They're actually pushing for Grown in Britain certified timber where it is available. So that leads us nicely on to chain of custody. What is chain of custody and how does it work? So chain of custody, this is the definition from the PEFC definition, actually. Chain of custody certification is a mechanism for tracking certified material from the forest to the final product to ensure that the wood fibre or non-wood forest material contained in the product or product line can be traced back to the certified forest. So that's the definition, but what does that actually mean? Well, in practice, we've got our forest. So this could be UKWAS, certified forest, it's a UK forest. So that means that timber coming out of that forest could be certified to all of those three standards. So that on the delivery ticket, you could actually put on that delivery ticket PEFC, FSC, and grown in Britain. That timber moves to the sawmill, where it's converted from the logs into sawn product. This is a very basic supply chain, this one. And again, so if that sawmill wants to pass on that certification for that product, they must also be registered under the relevant chain of custody scheme standards for those certifying organisations. So if they want to give all three, they've got to be certified PEFC, FSC, and grown in Britain. It's not as bad as it sounds because the actual certification is quite easy. The schemes are very similar, so there's only sort of certain changes for each one. So it's not sort of 3 times the work to get all three. It's probably another 10% additional work to get all three of those schemes. So it's not a big ask if you want to go for all three and not just one. The biggest thing is actually setting up the systems in the first place. That sawmill might pass that timber onto its the builder's merchant, so someone like an Arnold Laver or Travis Perkins or someone like that. And again, if they want to pass on that certification to the end user, again they must be certified against those chain of custody standards. And that timber then is delivered into our construction site. Now the construction site itself does not need to have certification. It may want to go for project certification, and we'll discuss that later on, but the site itself doesn't need certification. Okay, so anything delivered into the project, the site itself doesn't need certification, just needs to check that what it receives is. Now, obviously, that's a very simple supply chain. We're likely to have more supply chains. We're going to have things going either straight from the sawmill into factories or from merchants into factories that then come into our construction sites. So there's a lot, the chain does get bigger. So again, if you're getting any finished products from, say furniture, in that example there, you need to make sure they are certified against the schemes one or all of the schemes. Now, it will depend on what timber those organisations buy, whether they want to have all three. So, for example, if our furniture manufacturer there is only buying PEFC timber from Europe, then there's no point maybe in him having the FSC or Grown in Britain certification. So he might just go for the PEFC certification. Or we might have our timber merchant, she might have only buy FSC and Grown in Britain timber. So again, they might not stock FSC timber, unlikely, but it's just an example. The issue is obviously where we get our broken chain of custody. So it might be that our furniture manufacturer is actually buying certified timber from the sawmill or from the merchant, but they haven't got the certification themselves. So when they deliver into site, they will not be able to make a claim on their delivery ticket. And this very much the biggest issue there is generally subcontractors. So it might be your joinery subcontractor or the concrete frame contractor who might have shuttering ply and timber delivered to their yard and then deliver that into your site. That's generally where we see most of the broken chains of custody coming in nowadays. So even those organisations will need to be certified if they are delivering that timber to the site. The bigger issue is where that broken chain is further down the supply chain. So it might be that someone's buying timber from a sawmill that hasn't got the chain of custody standard. That doesn't stop your furniture manufacturer or your timber merchant supplying that timber into your site. They will not be able to make a claim against it in most cases. There are some exceptions, but we'll talk about that later on. But in most cases, they won't be able to make a claim against it. So you do need to make sure that you check the delivery ticket, not just the chain of custody certificate. So we'll now go into that, what sort of things you need to be checking to make sure that the timber that actually arrives on your site is certified. So the first thing to do is obviously your suppliers. If where you're purchasing timber from someone that's going to deliver that timber to site, make sure you get a copy of their certificate. There's 2 ways of doing it. You can get a physical copy of the certificate. This is one for Arnold Laver. Make sure it's got their name on it, the correct address, obviously, the scope of products. So sawn timbers, those types of things, and the product supplied. So whether it's joinery, that type of stuff. They have a certificate number. It will have a start date and an expiry date, and make sure those start dates are within the project period. And if your supplier has more than one depot, obviously Arnold Labour's got a number of depots around the country, it will have an appendix which lists all of those certified depots. I've just highlighted one there because this ties in the delivery ticket we're going to look at later on, which is their Rainham Road, Essex. So you might be able to read these, but that is the Rainham branch in Essex that we're going to check against there. You can also check these online. This is a PEFC one. You can search by the supplier, their certificate number. You can find the depot and click on the more info for that depot, and then that will give you confirm the address, the certificate number, and that it's valid. The good thing about the website as well is that it will tell you whether the certificate is currently valid. Obviously, the paper certificates last 5 years, so if there have been any problems with their certification, the paper certificate won't tell you that, but the website does. So if they have been suspended for any reason, rather than the status being valid, it will stay status suspended until they get that issue sorted out. Every one of the main schemes has their own directory. I've listed I've listed them there, and we can make these slides available to you after the presentation, so you can actually go and visit those yourself. But like I said, that tells us that supplier is certified, but it doesn't tell you whether the actual product that you use on your site is certified. So you have obviously materials delivered. They all come in packs, so they might have labels on them, or stamped up on the side of the plywood, for example. The first thing that happens to site, those packs get broken down, and then we've got no record of that certification then, because that label gets thrown in the skip or in the bin. So we do need to make sure that we get that delivery note as well, make sure that does state the required information. So this, again, Arnold Labour is our example here, just because I had some good examples from them, not because they're the best. There's a lot of good suppliers out there. So, you know, supplied from, make sure it's supplied from a depot that's on the certificate. So this one is from that Rainham branch in Essex, so we know that's on that delivery ticket because we highlighted that earlier on the certificate. Make sure it's the correct delivery address. Excuse me. Make sure it's the correct delivery address, not the customer's office. For example, if we've got John Smith Fit Out there, the address on this one, if you can see it, it sort of says John Smith Fit Out, care of the main contractor at the new superstore or whatever, or the new hospital. If it had their depot address, then that wouldn't be sufficient for you on the site. You'd need to make sure you got a separate delivery ticket from John Smith Fit Out from their yard to your site, and they had the chain of custody certification to match that. So that's one thing to check. The other thing to check is the delivery date is within the validity of the certificate. Make sure there's a correct product description and a valid product claim. And you'll see here that both of these will say, on this one, you've got 70% PEFC certified and FSC mixed 70%. I'll explain what those percentages mean in a minute, but 70% is okay, just to let you know that. And last but not least, make sure you got the chain of custody certificate number somewhere on that certificate, on that delivery ticket, sorry. And most companies now will have it either in a box somewhere or a line down the bottom, which gives a bit more information, because they don't want to put all that information into their product description, because it takes up so much space. So you generally see, like they say, 70% PEFC certified, and then there's an explanation of that somewhere else on the delivery ticket. The other thing that's handy, it's not necessarily a requirement, but it's a quantity, and preferably something that can be used to calculate the total cubic meterage, so you can actually calculate how much certified timber was from each scheme would be useful for any of your reporting that you need to do. So we've got there are some timber delivery checklists out there. If you want to like say PEFC, FSC, both do their own checklists. You can get the PEFC one is particularly good. It's just a business card size one. Tells you the key points that you need to check on the delivery ticket. And some of the companies, Wilmot Dixon, have their own one there. You'll see. So if you want any of those, contact PEFC and they can send them out to you if you want them. So just on the claims, there are a number of claims that you're allowed to have on labels and delivery tickets. And luckily, We don't need to worry about all of them. We only need to worry about these ones. So for PEFC, you'll only have two main claims. You'll have 100% PEFC origin, or a percentage of PEFC certified material. And like I say, CPET and the most building certification schemes require a minimum of 70%. I'll explain how that 70% is worked out in a second, and we'll talk about what that means. So PFC 100% or percentage, most of the time they will say 70. FSC is very similar. You've got FSC 100% or FSC mix, and a percentage, again, that will normally be 70%. FSC do also have a recycled label, and that will have a percentage against it as well. Grown in Britain is slightly different because basically with Grown in Britain, everything is from the UK, but just the claims tells you actually where it's from. So GIBFP means that it's a forest product, means it's come direct. That means it's come direct from the forest to your site. It will all be grown in Britain because it doesn't allow a percentage claim in there. Whereas GIB source might be a mix of sources. So you might have some, that would be generally what they call GIB supplied or GIB sourced. That will mean that some of that timber might come straight from a forest. It does allow a small percentage from things like arboricultural works to be included in that mix. So and that's only up, again, that's up to 30% is allowed into that. As far as the claims go, this is what we mean by the claims. So if you've got a product, and this might probably something like CLT might be a good example here. So we've got CLT comes out of the forest in Austria, goes straight into the factory, gets manufactured into our CLT panel. That is likely to come out as 100% PEFC origin because all the timber is coming from one forest that's PEFC certified. So that's quite an easy one to remember. For the UK, though, you might have timber coming from a mix of forests. So, for example, we might have some timber coming from an UKWAS certified forest, which would allow you to use that PEFC certification. But a small percentage, up to 30%, might come from a UK FS managed forest. So that means it's not under UKWAS. That would come in under what they call the due diligence process. So there'll be a checks made to make sure that timber was from a legal and sustainable source. That could go into that mix for the sawmill and then get pushed through the supply chain as a mixed percentage. So a minimum of that timber is coming from the PEFC UKWAS certified forest. The remaining 30% is still coming from a legal and sustainable source. So it's all certified, it's all legal, and it's all sustainable. It just means that not all of it has come from that PEFC certified forest. So that's where you get that percentage claim. That's one example of how that percentage claim might work. The other example is where you've got a finished product, say a door. And a door is made up of a number of materials. You're going to have maybe a chipboard core. A fire door will have a solid chipboard core, and that might come from an FSC certified source in the UK. And then you might have the lippings and the veneers might come from oak from France. So it might be a PEFC certified source from France. So that will go into that factory at the end there. And the factory do their mix, do their calculations, and depending on which one, what the majority of the material is, it will make a decision on the claim that comes out. For this example, because there's more volume of chipboard, which was the FSC certified source, they might choose that that's an FSC mix 70%, and then they'll do what they call a controlled wood risk assessment on the timber coming from the PEFC source, for example. So that's what we mean by the claim. So all the timber that comes into that product is from legal and sustainable sources. It just might be coming from a mix of those sustainable sources. Quickly touch on project certification, and then we've got some time for some questions, hopefully. So if you've got any questions, please type them in the chat box. So project certification. The two main schemes do project certification. There are some differences. So PEFC, there is no minimum percentage of PEFC certified material required, whereas FSC at the moment require a minimum of 50% FSC certified material to get your project certification. The due diligence system is slightly different as well. So PEFC due diligence system is required for all other non-certified material, and they will accept FSC certified timber as part of that due diligence system. So when you're checking your material on site, if you've got delivery notes that say that the timber was FSC, they will accept that at the site level. FSC don't accept PEFC, unfortunately. So you basically, for any non-FSC material, you have to do a controlled wood risk assessment all the way back to the forest of origin and find out where it come from, see if that's high risk. If it's low risk, it's a little bit easier. If it's higher risk, there's a lot more work involved. So quite a bit of difference in around our due diligence requirements, which makes the FSC scheme a lot harder to get if you've got non-FSC material coming in. Both of them do partial certification. So if you can't get that full certification of a project, you might just want to do things like maybe the windows and doors, or the flooring, or whatever it might be that you decide, or the frame. So they both allow that partial certification. They allow you to use the various trademarks if you get over that certain percentage. Say that's 70% again, but they all will issue a final certificate to say how much you can use. So they're very similar in certain ways, but very different in the due diligence, and that's the key bit that may cause you an issue if you go for project certification. Personally, I'm not a fan. I think you can do a better job managing it yourself and not give yourself the extra hassle of that project certification. Just make sure you monitor the wood that comes onto your site, and there are various tools available that allow you to do that. Things like BRE Smart Waste System has a very good system for tracking all your timber and literally know how much you've got of each from each scheme. So just a couple of PEFC projects there. Certified projects. Olympic Park was dual certified. That actually did get FSC and PEFC project certification. Kingsgate House there was the first PEFC certified project, mainly because that was a CLT frame. So obviously all the timber that came in was from Austria in that particular example, from PEFC certified forests. So hence they went for the PEFC project certification on that particular project. So that's just to finish off, gives us a little call to action here. So we trust you now have a better understanding of responsible timber sourcing, and ask that you sort of take action on the following. So the first thing we'd like you to sort of commit to is ensure that responsible timber procurement is on your sustainability agenda. It's great to have you here today, and that obviously means that you are looking at responsible timber sourcing, so thanks for that. So let's make sure you spread that out to the rest of your organisation. Consider what timber you specify and where this may be sourced from. So, for example, we mentioned earlier on around things like we specify a lot of oak, for finished hardwood, and we haven't got enough in the UK for that. So do think about, whether you can actually specify other timbers. And there's some good information on our organisation that we own, Trada, on what other timbers might be suitable for your project, and what you might want to use as a different specification. So rather than oak, internally you might want to use an ash or something like that, or a beech. Externally, rather than oak cladding, you might want to use a sweet chestnut cladding, or a modified timber, something like a brimstone or something like that, which is a thermally modified timber. And we go into more information on modified timbers and stuff like that on the circular economy presentation in a few weeks' time. So if you want a bit more information on that, come along to that. So consider what you specify and where this may be sourced from. Ensure the other one there, just going back to that, actually might be things like plywoods and OSBs. Could you use a lower risk, easier to trace OSB product that's made in the UK or Ireland than it is to maybe get a hardwood ply in from the Far East, somewhere like that. So that's another example there where you may want to look at. Ensure where you do specify timber certification, timber certification schemes that meet the CPET requirements. Make sure you use, so that at the moment that's at PEFC, FSC, and grown in Britain. Obviously, FLEGT is on there, but you might need to put more controls in place to make sure that you can trace that timber from the port that it comes into to your site. So you might need a little bit more work there if you can only get hold of FLEGT timber for your particular specification. But for FSC, PEFC, grown in Britain, they would meet the schemes. And like I say, ensure that timber is delivered onto the project with that full chain of custody. So check those delivery tickets. And like I say, if you don't check anything else, we talked about ply being our higher risk. Make sure you check delivery tickets and your plywood has your certified timber. Okay, so thanks for your time there. We will have some feedback. I probably won't do it through this actual feedback source. We might do it through the I think Jack's going to send you out a separate link for some feedback, but we'll carry on with that in a second. So if you've got any questions, We've got about 10 minutes, quarter an hour until the end of our session. So if you've got any questions, if you want to type them in the chat box for the Q&A, I think we've got some in the Q&A by the looks of it. Jenny Foyce, is it possible to use this webinar as a training presentation? We will be recording it, so you will be able to direct, if you're a member, you will be able to put we will have this on the TDUK website or the TTF website, so you should be able to download that and watch it. I'll let Jack confirm that in a second. So next one is from Harry. In a circular economy and focus on recycling, etc., does the PEFC FSC certification inhibit that in any way? I'm thinking there may be perfectly good timber out there, but which chain of custody is lost. Similarly, are there problems for small sawmills to compete amongst bigger sawmills who are not certified but who should be supported? I'll answer those two separately because they are really two separate questions. So the first one on circular economy, reuse is allowable under the government CPET definition. So if you can confirm that your timber is from a reuse source, that's fine. And what we use, and that's the same for the certification schemes as well. So people like BREEAM and SCAR, the key thing they will ask is, can you demonstrate where this comes from? So where that timber comes from or product comes from. So pictures or photographs of them in either in situ at their original building, or you can see a reclamation yard or something like that. If you've got some pictures there, that will all be good enough evidence to confirm that that is reused, and then you wouldn't need that FSC or PEFC certification or growing Britain certification in those particular circumstances. For recycled timber, generally, if you've got a recycle element, like I say, most of them, FSC does have its recycled scheme, so that's incorporated into that as well. So there's two options there for the circular economy side of things. As far as the smaller sawmills, absolutely we should be supporting the smaller sawmills. The bigger guys that in the UK, so people like BSW, James Jones, those types of guys, they have all got certification against all three schemes. As far as I'm aware, I know BSW has got all three schemes. I think James Jones is just PEFC and FSC at the moment. But the smaller sawmills, that's where the Grown in Britain standard came in. That's one of the reasons why that came in, because there wasn't an affordable chain of custody scheme for smaller sawmills. So you'll see a lot of the smaller sawmills now will have Grown in Britain certification. So someone like Vaston Timber, which is, they're actually quite a big sawmill. They're the biggest hardwood sawmill in the UK, but they're small compared to a BSW or a James Jones. They will have Grown in Britain certification. So good example there of how the Grown in Britain scheme is supporting some of those smaller sawmills and smaller woodlands as well, because that's the other thing. Smaller woodlands couldn't always justify the FSC or PEFC, i.e. Aquas certification for their forests. So that's again by Grown in Britain. So that means you can manage that forest to the UK forestry standard, which is a legal requirement anyway, and that timber can come out and go through the Grown in Britain chain of custody scheme. So it's a lot of good opportunities there for smaller sawmills and smaller forest owners. One from Piers, Latham, why do FSC not accept PEFC, whereas PEFC accepts FSC? Is it just FSC thinking they are more robust scheme? Absolutely, Piers. I think that is absolutely the understanding I have. They will not recognise PEFC for whatever reason. You'd have to ask FSC, I'm afraid, for the actual answer for that one. But I think it's just them trying to protect their own scheme and make sure that no one else, trying to make it difficult for any other schemes to get a foot in the door. In the UK, I think we have got quite a diverse range of products coming from FSC, PEFC, and Grown in Britain. So I don't think they're winning that battle, and I think it would be a lot easier for everyone if they did accept PEFC under the things like project certification. Would make things a lot easier. From Joan, re-FSC project certification, will they not accept PEFC as controlled wood? My understanding is no, Joan. They they will not accept it as controlled wood. You have to go back and do the controlled wood risk assessment. You probably know a lot more about that than I do, but from the discussions we've had with different people and from projects that I've helped out in the past, they've gone back to FSC and said, look, we've got this PEFC certified product, will you accept that? And they've said, no, you've got to go all the way back to the forest. So unless they've changed that recently, I haven't seen anything to say they've changed otherwise, but that was the case up until about a year ago. So I'm sure they haven't changed it since. So unfortunately not. Any other questions? Let's have a look. So one from Brett. So we've got one from Brett. I think he said, can the PEFC claim 100% PEFC certified and a new 100% PEFC origin claim both be used, or will the one be phased out? My understanding is that PEFC origin will replace, 100% PEFC origin will replace the 100% PEFC certified. So it will that will be replaced, is my understanding, Brett. Okay. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes. So if you've got any other questions while we're on, we've still got time for some questions if you want to answer any. Just while we're waiting for any further questions, just to let you know that if you have registered all your details, so your full name, and you left us your email address when you registered for the webinar, we will PEFC will be sending you a certificate of attendance, so you can use that for your CPD going forward. So hopefully, if you've registered that, you will get that through in the next day or two. But just, I say, last few minutes, if there's any other questions, we're happy to hang around. If not, you're quite welcome to leave if you've finished. So thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate you attending our next sessions. Like I say, just to remind you, those that weren't here at the beginning, we have got some more sessions. We're running these sessions near enough every Tuesday. I think the only one we haven't got is next week, but we've got sessions near enough from the beginning of October all the way up to COP26. So if you have would like to attend any of the others, we're doing the next one is on carbon sequestration. So hoping that's going to be quite a well-attended course. So that's going to discuss how you allow for carbon within timber buildings and timber products. And we've got our expert there, Jane Anderson, who's going to be attending that to answer any questions at the end, any detail. Following that, we've got another one with PEFC, which is on timber and the circular economy. And then the next one after that is on the TDUK responsible purchasing policy and how, so they're more aimed at our timber industry members, that one maybe, but what you should be looking at on that. But also for our specifier members, that will cover some of the changes we're looking to make to the RPP to try and make sure that everyone is specifying, for example, responsibly sourced sustainable timber. Okay. A couple of other questions just coming through at the moment. So can certification be retrospectively provided? Sorry, start again. Can certification be retrospectively applied if proven, if not requested at the point of order? If you don't order FSC timber, but it turns up on your site on the delivery ticket as FSC certified, then that's fine. You know, you can use that evidence towards your project certification or to add on to your scheme. If it isn't on the delivery ticket when it's delivered, that starts to get a little bit more difficult, because it may be that the operation is operating under the under one of the schemes where we're allowed to put so much certified timber into your site, and there's other stuff that they have to provide as non-certified because of the amount of timber they buy. So that might get a little bit difficult, but by all means, talk to your supplier. They may be able to retrospectively apply that certification, so no problem. Thanks for your comment there, Piers. I won't repeat that, but agreed. As far as TDUK, did TDUK have their own website? At the moment, that's accessed through the TTF at the moment. The TDUK website is currently being built. For those of you who don't know, TDUK is formed by the merger of the Timber Trade Federation and the Timber Research Development Association, TRADA. So at the moment, those two organisations are running their own websites side by side at the moment. So if you're looking for any information, you can either go to the TRADA website or the TDUK website. We're currently on a project with our web designers at the moment to try and merge those two sites into one, which is obviously going to take a bit of time. But so in the meantime, if you're looking for any information on TDUK, best place to probably look at that is from the TTF website at the moment. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, if you like I say, last chance to, if you want a question answered, stick it in the chat box, or the question and answer session will answer it. But if not, thanks very much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming along to this, and hope to see you at one of the other sessions over the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
Also, a quick point: the recording will be available on the TTF YouTube page tomorrow afternoon, and then we'll send you the copy of the slides as well.
Great stuff. Thanks, Jack, for that clarification. So there you go. So that's YouTube channel accessed through the TTF website. I take it they'll be able to access that.
Yeah. I'll send out an email. I'll send an email to all the attendees tomorrow with all the details and stuff on it. So yeah, thank you for attending.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers then. Thanks for